Over the last few decades, researchers have typically focused on biological and psychological explanations of criminal behavior. However, sociologists look to social factors to explain violence and crime. Going back to our social forces, history, environment, and culture, how do they play a role in one's tendency to commit crimes? A sociologist focuses on the social conditions, including our social structures, that produce violence and crime. A sociologist also believes that social policy changes, as well as changes within our social structures, are oftentimes needed to reduce violence and crime. The following theories and concepts help to explain why individuals and groups are deviant, violent, and/or commit crimes. Note that the rational choice theory is not in your readings, but is an important explanation of violence and crime, so I will explain it here. Rational choice theory is based on exchange theory, which developed in the study of the family. This theory deals with the costs and benefits of involving yourself in any kind of relationship. For example, the benefits of being a housewife versus the cost of not being able to pursue an independent career and losing a bit of freedom. When it comes to the study of criminology, a person weighs the potential risks of getting caught and whatever the punishment may be, with the rewards of committing the criminal act. One extreme example of this is the mother who steals from a grocery store to provide food for her starving children. There are other examples as well. Perhaps joining a gang is something that would be a rational choice for a person in a certain neighborhood, depending on their circumstances. Also, looking back to our discussion last week of drugs and alcohol, for some adolescents, it may be more rewarding and more rational for them to consume drugs or alcohol in order to maintain or gain popularity and acceptance among their peers than the risk of whatever physical complications may arise from them experimenting with drugs and alcohol. Although there aren't any specific criminological theories that you need to know under the conflict perspective, you should know the basic viewpoints of this theory when it comes to crime and violence. These mainly center around oppression and inequality in the criminal justice system. When it comes to class, this inequality is mainly seen in that law enforcement focuses more attention and imposes harsher penalties on street crime than white-collar crime. Once arrested, poor people are disadvantaged because they cannot afford bail and may have to use a public defender if they go to trial. These two things greatly increase one's likelihood of conviction. When it comes to gender, prostitutes are targeted more and punished more severely than their customers and pimps. The bias against non-whites in the criminal justice system is evidenced in the disproportionate number of Latinos and blacks in the criminal justice system. Black codes, which were in effect prior to the Civil War, were laws that stipulated that blacks could be treated far more severely than whites for similar crimes, and that crimes against blacks were not taken as seriously. For example, the rape of a black woman was not considered a crime, but the alleged rape of a white woman was. Also, blacks were executed for property crimes such as burglary or arson, while whites had to pay a fine or serve a short jail term. Blacks were also not allowed to testify or serve on juries. Blacks and Latinos are overrepresented in every stage of the criminal justice system, from traffic stops to prison sentences. Although the statistics clearly show that some form of profiling is going on, it's very difficult to draw the line between racial profiling and good police work. In other words, investigating something or someone who is suspicious or out of place. Law enforcement officers often refer to a gut feeling or instinct that they rely on to make decisions in the field. Since instinct is such a subjective thing, it is pretty much impossible for anyone other than that officer to know what was going on in his or her head at the time and whether or not race had anything to do with it. Consider this. Blacks make up 13% of the U.S. population. In a study that involved a self-report of drug behavior, 13% of the drug users were black, which means that because this is the same as their percentage of the population, that just about as many black people use drugs as other races. However, when you look at arrest data, 35% of those arrested for drug crimes are black. When the case goes to trial, 55% of those convicted for drug crimes are black, and 74% of those sentenced to prison are black. At the rate we are going, by the year 2020, 2 out of every 3 black men between the ages of 18 and 34 years old will be in prison. Do you think that this can act as a self-fulfilling prophecy for young black men? A similar study in San Diego found that Latinos make up 20% of the driving age population, but accounted for 29% of the traffic stops and 50% of those stopped and searched. Clearly, Latinos are also overrepresented. You may have noticed that your textbook mentions techniques of neutralization, but never really explains what they are, so I thought I'd fill in the blanks for you here. Techniques of neutralization are something that juveniles typically use when trying to explain away their criminal behavior. There are 5 techniques. The first is denial of responsibility. This is when the juvenile says, "It's not my fault, I was provoked." Denial of injury is when they deny that they actually did any sort of significant harm to someone. So this would be like if someone robbed a liquor store and then came back and said, "Oh, they make so much money, what I stole, was a drop in the bucket to what they make." Denial of victim is when they place the blame on the person who they've wronged, saying things like, "Oh, they had it coming, she deserved it." Condemning the condemners is when they attack the people who are either arresting them or judging them. So this would be like accusing cops of being corrupt, saying that police officers are out to get them, that they've been framed. And then finally, an appeal to higher loyalty is when they try to convince people that they had to do it for some good reason. Like, he disrespected my mom, I had to protect her honor. We also see these techniques being used by adults in certain situations, especially in white-collar crime, the denial of injury, when they steal from a large corporation or embezzle money from their company. And the appeal to higher loyalty is used a lot in organized crime and the mafia, with defending family honor and things like that. Now, I know there's a lot of information to cover in these chapters on violence, crime, and criminal justice, so I suggest that you focus on the theories of criminology and really have a strong grasp of those. Don't worry about memorizing specific crime statistics, but be sure you notice the patterns and trends that are emerging as they discuss crime in U.S. society. All right, good luck!